Hey, thanks. So in vessel performance, there's lots of difficult questions you want to answer as a shipping company. So for example, is it worth installing this coating on the vessel at the next dry dock? Or what's the best way I can keep my vessel above the D band of carbon intensity indicator, both now and in the next few years? Or am I in compliance with the charter party requirements for performance? And if I'm not, what can I do about it? Now, there's lots of software being developed which promises to help you answer these questions, and you might be getting a bit skeptical about how good this software can be, because being able to answer the questions isn't just about software functionality, it's about what's behind the software, and in particular, where the data comes from. But today we're going to hear about software which is tied to one of the world's biggest maritime engine companies and one of the world's biggest suppliers of shipboard navigation equipment, and which has its own decarbonisation modelling department in-house. That's Wärtsilä. So on the surface, this is a talk about software, but there's also an enormous amount of consultancy and services and data gathering behind it. For example, we can get ways to get better performance data from the ship without installing any more equipment, such as getting more performance data from your ECDIS automatically and pre-filling the noonday reports. So the better data you have, the better the advice the software is able to give. It's not cheap, but we're starting to see lots of comparisons of different investments you can make in vessel performance and the returns they offer. So you can put money into a propeller fin or put money into some electrical equipment, and we can look at digital technology itself in this way. And Wärtsilä thinks that compared to other options, digital technology has a lower capex and a faster payback time, but only if it's done well. It's so easy to invest in digital technology and just end up with a mess of systems that don't integrate. So our speaker today is Marko Zelger, who's a product manager with Wärtsilä Voyage based in Copenhagen. He's been working in maritime technology since 2013, and he's also a former interpreter between Japanese and German. So if we've got any Japanese speakers on the webinar, maybe you can try it, although he's giving his talk today in English. So as usual with the webinars, we should have plenty of time for questions. So please enter them in the Q&A box. Keep the chat box separately for chatting. And we're going to take questions after the presentation. So I'd like to invite Marko to start his talk.
Thank you, Karl. And yeah, hopefully I'm not going to be tested in my Japanese today. It has been quite a few years back. So yeah, let's talk about shipping. It's all good. Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. And I'll go ahead and just share here. All right. So maybe I'm not going to go into too much detail about the carbon intensity indicator today, but just give a very brief, well, basically I wrote it down here on the slide what it is, so I'm not going to go much into detail here. But the main points, as you can see on the left side, is, of course, well, since last June of last year, when the CI scheme has been officially adopted at MEPC 76, decarbonisation efforts have become more serious, urgent issue. But yeah, we probably know, but just for the sake of repeating, so it's based on the IMO DCS reporting scheme, mandatory from next year, and each ship is going to get a rating from A to E, where A, B, C are considered compliant and D and E are non-compliant, depending on how many years you are there. Right. So yeah, on the right side is what I would like to draw your attention to. So I'm not trying to be dramatic, of course, here, but we all know we need to act now. It's an older message, but so Wärtsilä has been doing this assessment of the world fleet. So the graph or the infographic on the right-hand side is an assessment on the world fleet based on publicly available data that already within 3 years, the majority of the vessels of the world fleet would fall into non-compliant D and E ratings if no action is being taken at all. So, right, while the direct consequences from a regulation standpoint may, for now at least, seem not very severe, such D and E ratings on the own vessels may have quite a significant impact on commercial consequences as well. So, of course, reducing emissions in the most immediate sense mostly means reducing fuel consumption. And the pressure to reduce fuel waste specifically and increase efficiency in shipping has been on for quite a number of years already. However, now with additional CII related regulations from the IMO, shipping companies face an additional layer of complexity, needing to balance commercial, operational, now also emissions related considerations. So again, in this webinar, I will not go too much into the details of what is the carbon intensity indicator, the regulations, and so on, and what is their impact. But I'd like to show you how digital technologies can help you dealing with that, with these regulations from a compliance standpoint, but also with optimizing emissions management from a holistic perspective, and not as a standalone solutions, as you probably have seen this already a few times. So, right, we know that from January 1st of next year, action, or before already, action is required, and I would assume that most already have taken quite some concrete actions, for maybe made calculations on your own vessels, what CII rating your vessels are expected to be or projected to be. But what options does a ship owner have to improve the carbon intensity, and what decarbonization technologies do exist currently on the market? So I'll start from here. Right, as Wärtsilä is an engine maker, so I have to address this first. Of course, you may expect this from an engine maker, that we offer quite a lot of consultancy services around engines and propulsion retrofits, etc. So this is what we do in order to determine the decarbonization technology that matches best for your target vessel. We do have, as Karl mentioned, a decarbonization modeling department. There we are able to simulate the effects of various retrofit options. You can see a few ones on this slide. So this can be done for each specific ship, considering the vessel's existing machinery configuration, lifespan, and operational patterns. So we offer a custom consultancy service for a specific target vessel. Therefore, you here see empty percentage numbers. These will then be calculated for that specific vessel you order the service. The goal is, of course, to make sure that the retrofit option with the best ROI for that very vessel will be chosen. However, not all vessels may be in immediate need of such relatively drastic measures right from the start, as this approach needs a bit of resources. So before we bring out these big guns, we first want to get the big picture instead of the fleet carbon intensity, and start with going for the low-hanging fruits. Right, so here in a previous study, this is not from this year, but a bit back, we did a study on an MR tanker built in 2011. We assessed the fuel saving potential and payback times of different decarbonization technologies or fuel saving technologies. So maybe unsurprisingly, compared with the relatively large investments required for retrofit options, so-called fleet digital came out on top of it with the lowest payback time. So we could consider digital technologies as such a low-hanging fruit when it comes to decarbonization and fuel-saving technologies in general. And with Fleet Digital also, of course, here, VPO Digital Ship, we're in the right webinar. Now, even in shipping, digital technologies, of course, have been around for quite a while. And even though the payback time looks promising, these are very generic numbers, but they look promising compared to the other numbers you see. So the implementation of such digital technologies and the effective use of those come with their own challenges. If you turn it around, an unsuccessful implementation of digital strategy can eat up quite a lot of resources without bringing substantial value. So what are the main problems we face in the industry? So one of the main problems we face is that various digital products have been implemented over time, over the last quite a couple of years, but they may come from different suppliers, and they often function independently in different data silos. For example, separate manual reporting schemes coexist next to each other. One for example, EUMRV, one for general NUM reporting, several logbooks, etc. And in parallel, there may be even an auto-logging system that collects similar data, but in a different format from sensors. So integration between those different supplier systems is of course possible. However, it can take quite a bit of effort, requiring coordination and maintenance and so on. And nowadays also cybersecurity concerns have come to be more important, and they add further complexity. So what we aim to do at Wärtsilä Voyage is to connect all these separate systems and applications. So we connect those dots into one integrated platform where data is collected only once. Systems are linked to each other, creating synergies between these traditionally separate applications. As an example, we combine, for example, nautical charts, weather data, and our routing algorithm to link up ECDIS navigation, weather routing, and also shoreside commercial voyage planning into one connected system. Or noon reporting and autolog data are combined to model vessel performance, and the same setup is also being used for hull fouling analysis or voyage benchmarking, etc. And now we also, further than that, we also add emissions management as one more of those dots, which then draws from the same data set, linking it up with other applications. So because we want to avoid providing yet another standalone solution for emissions management, we have added an emissions module into our what we call Fleet Operations Solutions platform, FOS, where the same data is being processed or being used for navigational purposes, for vessel performance optimization, and now also for compliance. One of our main goals is to provide a scalable yet flexible solution that can be deployed easily across a diverse fleet of different types of vessels with different equipment on board. So depending on the circumstances of each vessel, some may be owned, some may be chartered, some have Wärtsilä equipment, other ones from other suppliers. So there may be different levels of integration that can be chosen, one for a purely software-based solution on one end of the spectrum, and then a more integrated solution where we connect data from different machinery and sensors. The important thing here for us is that we want to provide one user environment that is always the same for the end user, regardless of the level of integration chosen. And that we also don't have to rely only on reported data, but we also can utilize some sort of high frequency data to do adequate vessel performance modeling. So on the ship, this means that in our standard setup, again, there's different setups, but in the standard setup, we provide a semi-automated noon reporting system, SmartLog, which pre-fills part of the data automatically from existing shipboard equipment, and therefore increases data quality and reduces also manual workload. At the same time, SmartLog reporting can be used for as an IMO DCS and EU MRV compliant reporting tool, so avoiding the need for double reporting. Moreover, by using the same data that later will be submitted to the verifier, here the IMO DCS data, we ensure consistency between the preliminary CII rating calculated in our dashboard and the rating which will later be verified by the verifier. On shore, our integrated approach means that emissions management is not an isolated task, but it can be done in combination with other equally important tasks, such as charter party analysis, commercial voyage planning, etc., which we all provide in the same dashboard based on the same data. So the screenshot you see is one from our dashboard we provide, Wärtsilä FOS dashboard. So how does it look in practice, and what can we do beyond simple CII rating calculations by making use of modeling data and high frequency data, as I mentioned? So going into the emissions module I mentioned, which we added to this Fleet Operations Solution platform. So we're looking at three main functions we try to address. So on the first and most basic level, we create real-time visibility on the left, visibility of different carbon intensity ratings. There's a number of those without going into detail, but the carbon intensity indicator, the average efficiency ratio, as connected also then to the Poseidon principles, climate alignment, and also energy efficiency operational indicator, EOI. As a second step, making use of those high frequency data and vessel performance modeling, our system provides insights on the main factors that are impacting each vessel's carbon intensity. And last, but maybe most importantly here, we provide decision support for targeted actions for the vessel to stay compliant, both short-term and then also long-term. So going forward, I'd like to illustrate how the emissions module in our dashboard can help you with your emissions management. For each of the three functions I mentioned here, visibility, insights, and optimization, I will demonstrate how you would be able to use our tools to help solve such standard questions you may face when dealing with emissions. For that purpose, you will see some small snips of the dashboard of the emissions module of our Fleet Operations Solutions dashboard. So step one, as a first step, we want to look at the big picture of the fleet. I mentioned this before, without having to aggregate and update the latest emission data that is coming in from the ship manually with Excel table and so on. So this is, of course, processed automatically. The question I'll ask myself here may be, how does the fleet composition in terms of CII ratings look like today, and how will it look in 2026 if no measures are being taken at all to improve the carbon intensity? So the graphic you see shows data from a European tanker owner-operator. So how many vessels of that company fall into which category, into each category A, B, C, D, E for each year forward to 2026. So this is extrapolated based on the current year's data. The specific company here has already taken quite some actions to improve the carbon intensity of the vessels. So that's why the data doesn't look that bad. They need this for ESG reporting, so there's some additional incentives to work on that already. So now we can pinpoint the vessels that are in risk of falling down from to a D or a E rating, so the red, light red parts here, and ask the same question for a single vessel. What year will it become non-compliant if no action is taken? So the projected rating here again is based on the most up-to-date year-to-date preliminary rating. So we're collecting the data from the ship until the latest new report, calculate the preliminary rating or the preliminary carbon intensity, and then calculate for the following years what the rating would be based on that carbon intensity. So next we can have a look at the vessel that is in risk of becoming non-compliant already within this year, the ongoing year. We can look at the year-to-date trends. Here it's on a monthly basis, but it can also be more granular, weekly or even daily if you like. And we can see while the vessel is currently in a D rating, so non-compliant, it's actually quite close to the boundary to a C level, C rating. So if we take the right actions, we may be able to help pushing it into a compliant C rating before the end of the year. So we also have, we are working on improved notification setup, where you will be able to receive notifications that alert you when a vessel is crossing some boundaries. So you don't actually have to monitor the dashboard night and day. Right, so far we have simply provided a dashboard that handles emissions data automatically and present it in a meaningful way. But as a next step, I like to demonstrate how vessel performance modeling can help in providing further insights. So to understand the factors that are impacting the vessel's emissions the most, we need to first understand exactly how the vessel behaves in different conditions. For example, how it's being impacted by different weather conditions, different drafts, or what extent of hull fouling, for example, contributes to excessive consumption of the vessels or emissions in this case. So before I mentioned that we do not only collect noon reported data, but we also collect high frequency data from shipboard equipment and combine it together with weather data we receive as well. So Here we make use of vessel performance modeling based on those different data inputs to assess which ones are the biggest contributing factors impacting the vessel's carbon intensity rating. In the example shown here, we, for example, see the performance deterioration or hull fouling. It has a significant impact on the vessel's emissions. So here 9% in the example. Therefore, we know that, for example, scheduling hull cleaning rather sooner than later this year may not only reduce simply fuel costs, but it may also have most probably an impact or make a difference for this specific vessel to move over from D to a compliant C rating within this year. So I mentioned earlier again, so in the FOSS Fleet Operations Solution platform, we use the same data to be processed for different applications, which sometimes are interconnected. So one example we see here is that we use our analysis for the vessel's performance tracking module, which you see a screenshot here, and link it to assess its impact on the carbon intensity. In this case, say 9% of the emissions are due to the impact of hull fouling above the set benchmark for this specific vessel. So as a vessel manager, I know that this is something I actually can have an impact on. Other factors that can have a negative impact on the carbon intensity, on the rating, maybe high speed instructions, weather itself, or excessive idling periods, etc. Those factors are then more dependent on operators' instructions, weather routing, for example, or vessels' employment decisions made by the chartering department. Of course, depending on if I am the commercial operator of the ship as well or not, the angles from which I can impact the vessel's carbon intensity will differ. This way may play then an important role going forward in the future if a deterioration of the CII rating needs to be attributed to operational or to technical factors, meaning if the responsibility of that lies mainly with the charter or with the owner. So now that we understand what the main impacting factors on the vessel's carbon intensity are, we may move on to the third step and take targeted actions to ensure compliance. So here in the third last step, I'll discuss 3 scenarios. In the first scenario, we go back to the previous example. You've seen this already, where we realized that one of our vessel's fleet is in risk of ending up in a non-compliant B rating this year, but it's relatively close to a C rating boundary. What options do I have to improve my vessel's current non-compliant D rating to a compliant C rating until the end of the year? So the system is able to calculate the required average speed for the remainder of the year, so that the vessel's carbon intensity will be decreased to just meet the C rating trajectory. However, the carbon intensity will also depends on the changing vessel performance, as we have seen, for example, due to hull fouling, and it also depends on the distance sailed. In the compliance calculator, you see here, we are able to play with these inputs. For example, in this case, we have some demo data. So if we are scheduling a hull cleaning from which we expect a 3% performance improvement, the system will calculate how this will impact the required remaining average speed that can be instructed, while ensuring that the vessel is going to meet the C rating trajectory until the end of the year. So other options include, for example, increasing or decreasing vessel employment in terms of sailing days or collecting miles. Now, in the second scenario, we go more into immediate voyage planning, where we can use our shoreside voyage planner to simulate various options for upcoming voyages. What will be the estimated CII for the planned voyage, and what will be the impact on the vessel's year-to-date rating? With our web voyage planner, the commercial operator can simulate different scenarios, considering commercial factors such as time charter equivalent, scheduling options, weather forecasts, vessel performance, and now also the voyage plan's impact on the emissions rating. So in the last example, we look at more long-term planning of the vessel's environmental compliance. In this scenario, we know that the vessel has a dry docking opportunity next year, 2023, but we do not exactly know if retrofitting the vessel with a decarbonisation technology will have a significant impact on extending the vessel's compliance lifespan, which in turn also will depend on instructed speeds in the future. We may even need to decide on a multi-year charter party speed consumption guarantee that should not jeopardize the vessel's CII compliance due to the charter speed instruction. So the question we may ask ourselves here is, if I use the dry docking opportunity next year to retrofit with an airboat profit, I will say in a second what it is. So until what year can I guarantee the current charter party speed, which may be, for example, 13 knots, and how will it affect vessel financing in terms of Poseidon principles? Energy profit, say, as mentioned, is then an energy saving cap from Wärtsilä Marine Power, which is fitted on the propeller, and you can expect around 2% of fuel savings by doing that. So in the FOSS emissions dashboard, the user is able to simulate various such scenarios to help make the best decisions. Here we can, for example, input the expected performance improvement from such a retrofit we consider for the dry docking opportunity in 2023. And we can see what impact it will have on the maximum allowed average speed to still meet the C rating trajectory, assuming the latest operational patterns. In the columns on the left, then you see the current year-to-date rating or the carbon intensity here, 5.1, and also for the future years, how that will be due to the more strict regulations in the coming years, to what rating that will correspond. And in the second column, you see the required CII trajectory midpoint, so the sea level, which will have lower and lower carbon intensity over the years. Right, so this calculator helps you when planning your vessels years ahead, considering retrofitting performance improving technologies and the impact on the required operational speed instructions to stay compliant. The same calculation is also being done in respect to AER, average efficiency ratio, staying below the Poseidon principles trajectory at given speeds, so the impact on vessels financing can also be taken into account. So of course, there is only so much a tool alone can help, especially when it comes to making decisions with quite a significant long-term impact on the vessel's commercial value. Therefore, for a more in-depth assessment, we recommend to work together with our decarbonisation experts from Wärtsilä Marine Power on a consultancy basis. They can then assess the most suitable retrofit options and their impact on this very specific vessel in much more detail than a tool alone. So to wrap it all up, I hope I was able to demonstrate our three-layer approach on emissions management itself, where we can create visibility of fleet emissions. We provide insights in what factors impact the emissions rating of each ship. And we then provide decision support to take targeted actions to optimize the vessel's emissions. All this is then not done in isolation, but it's not just another CII tool, hopefully, but it's part of an integrated platform where different stakeholders, both on the ship and also ashore, work together, relying on the same data set for fleet operations. Last but not least, as mentioned, beside the digital solution, we also are then happy to provide our expertise from our decarbonisation modeling department with in-depth consultancy service that are most suitable for your ships.
Well, thank you. Oh, that's great. Okay, so now we'll go into the questions and answers session. If you want to stop screen sharing there, and if people please load your questions, we don't have any at the moment, but I've got a few of my own to get started. One of the things that struck me was just what a big cultural change we're seeing or about to see in shipping. I mean, people are used to using software to report and monitor and see what's happened in the past, like these key performance indicators, but this is now talking about the future, which is a very different way of using digital technology. I don't know if you've ever had thoughts along these lines.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I think, of course, so in shipping, we're not always the first movers, and then sometimes, like in this case, regulations are needed. So actually, people start to move, and of course, regulations themselves have been delayed many times in the past. So there is, due to that, maybe also a tendency to not necessarily act that quickly. But now I think we know there is no delay anymore for January 1st. So something needs to be done, and digital technologies as such, of course, as I mentioned, have been there for quite some time, and but it seems often more easy on paper than actually get some benefits out of it, and not only emissions but also of course fuel savings. It's all topic. The fuel price itself drives that very much, but now we have also regulations on top of that drives it as well.
Yeah. What about the question of compliance with CII? Because the way CII is written, it's not actually compliance in the sense that even if you get a D, you get 3 years to sort yourself out, and an E, you get 1 year. But it sounds like the shipping industry is taking it as compliance. You have to be in the C band. I don't know if.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So right. So I mean, so the consequences from a legal standpoint are probably not that severe, at least not now, if the vessel is in D rating or E rating. I mean, there needs to be an updated SEMP plan and so on. Well, of course, there is something, but everybody, I guess, expects more the pressure on the commercial part. For example, how attractive the vessels are, for example, on the charter markets. So yeah, I think that is what probably drives it quite a bit at the moment.
So even though you're allowed to keep operating, it's still you're gonna feel like a naughty boy, I suppose, in terms of your discussions with just got your customers and your own staff. As people want the sea and they want to know if be sure they're about to get the sea. And
yes, yeah, and there's coming more. Of course, we can accept more regulations. It doesn't stop here. I mean, the emissions trading scheme and so on, it's also coming, so which then will have much more direct commercial impact on ship operations.
Okay, so we're seeing some questions coming in. Sanjay, if you can put your questions in the Q&A box, please, rather than the chat box, so we keep it all together. But the first question here is Panos Theodosopoulos, who I think is a Chief Digital Officer with Ocean King in Greece, which is a sort of shipbuilding advisory company. But they're asking, do you see CII playing a disruptive role in the owner-charter relation or direction of them working closer? I suppose that's pretty hard to see, but that's an interesting question, isn't it?
It's very interesting and very relevant question. And here maybe the question was also addressed in relation to, for example, owner-charter relation in terms of charter parties. So this is also something we try to cater to in our tools, where we say emissions management is not an isolated task, but it interacts also, for example, with charter party warranty analysis. So, of course, in one of the scenarios, I showed that if the allowed speed to instruct the vessel without jeopardizing the vessel to become non-compliant goes down and down over the next years, and you still want to, for example, guarantee a full speed of the vessel of, let's say, 30 knots, then at some point that will not be possible anymore without having the vessel becoming non-compliant. So I think there is also quite a bit of discussions. I think even PIMCO is drafting some standard charter parties versions, as far as I know, where charter and owner are then forced to, well, not forced to, maybe to kind of motivated, I would say, to work with each other to make sure that the vessels stay compliant. And that's also where it will also be relevant on what actually the reason was a vessel is maybe non-compliant, D or E rating. What made it change from C to D? Was it simply a speed instruction, which is charter's responsibility, or maybe the vessel is not well maintained, which is kind of on the owner's shoulder? So those will be for sure relevant and require also collaboration between owners and charters. But it's a very interesting question. I think time will tell how close owners and charters will then work on this.
I can imagine charterers being given a login to this software so they can see it for themselves, and the owner is saying, look, if I go 30 knots, I'm going to be D by the end of the year. You can see it here. You can see exactly what I'm dealing with.
Yes, right. And of course, I mean, from a supplier's perspective, we are, of course, happy to provide logins to multiple stakeholders, but of course, we will never do so without the permissions of our customer. So, but if our customers, for example, an owner says we would like to share a specific part of the dashboard with our charterers, then that's possible. We can just make another login and they will see a certain data set that can be shared. But data sharing is, of course, a bit a touchy topic sometimes.
Okay, so next question is from Dimitris Kampanis, who I think is business development manager with Alpha Deval. He's asking about blockchain and what it can mean for shipping. Personally, I'm very skeptical about blockchain, but I can see it's got value where you've got partners who don't have trust, but that's not what we're dealing with here. We're just dealing with complexity with data, but also it may be a way to get everyone to agree on systems that talk to each other. I don't know if you've thought about blockchain at all, have you?
Yes, I'm not the expert here, and it's not directly relating to what we presented here. But of course, yeah, it is a topic, and yeah, I'm sure it can be used to also make sure that the data is, say, cannot be changed afterwards, and some kind of certainty or this trustless, how we call it, transaction where you don't need a third party to verify it. But it's not my area of expertise, so I am not really able to.
Well, there's no concerns about trust here, just concerns about making systems that talk to each other within the shipping company, isn't it?
Right, yes, yeah. So that data cannot be altered afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got questions from Sanjay Sachdev. So he's asking about the compliance. Are you able to answer these questions? I've got a rough idea, but you probably know more than me. So what happens if a vessel goes into E, and what kind of, how is it people going to check people are actually doing what they say they're doing on CII? I guess that's what it means.
Yes, I'm not sure if this is a question relating to the regulations itself or to how we could.
I think it's about the regulations itself. I think it's
okay. Yeah. So I mean, as far as the regulations are concerned, I think you can be 3 consecutive years in a D rating, and only then you will have to take actions. You will have to update your SCMP, updated plan, as far as I know, and the same applies if you have an E rating in one single year. So that is the kind of direct consequences, that you need to update the plans on board of the ship. And right, so how we can, of course, help with that, this is what I tried to address in the dashboard, to find out early, because in a case where you have not implemented any solution, you will not know necessarily during the year that your vessel is ending up in a D and E rating. But knowing early, of course, in the most basic level, you will be able to take action. That's what we try to support.
Okay, so just for the audience, so we're getting a lot of questions now. If you see, you can order questions by most recent and most upvotes in the top row. If you do it by most upvotes, then we're all looking at the same page, and then we'll answer the questions that have got most upvotes. And if you want to upvote questions, you click on that thumbs up symbol. So that puts Natalia Walker at the top of the list, and we think she's project analyst with Kara's Book Shipping. And another point, if you can make sure the questions are in the Q&A box. So if Roth Fothergill can put your question in the Q&A box, then we'll just leave the chat for chatting. So we only need to look at one screen. So, but Natalia's asking about, so for the discussion with the charterers, could you give them a sort of PDF report about the vessel performance rather than giving a login to the dashboard? I suppose you probably could.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Natalia. And right, so I think the main thing we need to address, and also how to share the data with third parties. One way of doing so is extracting PDF reports. I believe, for example, from the web planner, where you get estimates of the CII to create a PDF that can be shareable. And then also, I mean, there's different ways of doing it, creating PDFs, giving logins to third parties, which we mentioned, or we work also with APIs. So the API, then specific data can be shared, for example, with third party who process the data further as well. So there is different ways of doing it. I think there's probably quite a bit of different formats of such emissions data that needs to be presented to external stakeholders, which always is a bit different. So we will need to see how this can be standardized, or if there is any specific customization that needs to be done. But oftentimes, APIs is a good way to share data into other systems.
Okay, so if we go to Gary Yao now, who's with Vesselman in Singapore. So he's asking about integrating with equipment from other companies. So I suppose the answer is it's much easier for you to integrate with your own your own systems, but we probably
it's always easier, of course, with integrate with things we know. But one of our main goal is here that we do not want to say this is a purely Wärtsilä system, and if you don't use Wärtsilä for anything else, it will not work, because that's not the reality. So of course, we do also gather data from other sources, and it's a bit the balance between having a system that can be implemented easily. That means that we try to collect the data where it's easiest, combine it, different sources, and then make the best use with modeling and so on. But it's a longer story, but of course, if the vessel uses a non-Wärtsilä Actis, for example, that's no problem for us to include that vessel in the same system. We will just do it in a different way.
Okay, so we're going back to Natalia Walker with Carisbrook Shipping. I think this is a question about the emission trading scheme and whether charterers or ship owners should pay for the emissions trading costs. I'm sorry, Natalia, if I've misinterpreted what you're saying there, but it's more of a comment, really. But I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this, Marko. This is more about the discussions between the owners and the charterers, who's going to pay for.
Yes, so I have not seen it myself, but that's what I kind of addressed before. So that there is some. So there should be, so the question who actually then is responsible for change of the rating, for example, that needs to be addressed. And I think it's, as Natalia here writes, there seems to be this position statement already. I'm not on the latest, I don't have the latest information what this is now, but what we provide to do is also to, of course, we do know that if you don't operate the vessels, a speed instruction by the charter just may mess up your rating, basically. But to know what part of or how much this speed instruction attributes to a worse rating, or maybe it's also another part in comparison to factors that the owner itself can impact. So that is what we try to calculate with the data we have, so it becomes more clear what are the main reasons for example, non-compliance of a vessel.
Okay, so we've got two questions about the how we ensure that people are doing what they actually say. One's from Sanjay Sachdev, the other's from Ross Fothergill, who I found on LinkedIn. He's with GMT Shipping in Hong Kong, operations manager. So I guess shipping companies are sending a report at the end of the year about their emissions and the other data made for the CAI. And does Class verify this? Do you know?
Right. So we're not a verifier ourselves. So what we do is I mentioned SmartLog, which is our reporting tool, and that is IMO DCS and EUMLV compliant. So if our customers choose to use that as a reporting tool, we collect the data, make the CII calculations, and at the same time, the same data can be then extracted at the right when it needs to be submitted to the verifier. And so we've created the interface between ship data and verifier. And of course, this is mainly about the handling data to reduce the need of handling the data yourself. So we provide the interface. So we basically just click, extract the data for the entire year, submit it to the verifier you have already, so no need to change. And the verifier will verify your IMO DCS data, UMRV data as well, and then also provide you with the CII rating. So we don't verify it ourselves, but we provide the interface.
And who's the verifier? Is it Class or the flag state, or
the classification society mostly? Yeah, but there's quite a number of them. So we would, of course, each has maybe slightly different formats, so we need to see which one it is, and then to some, we may have already an interface. To some other ones, we will then do it.
Okay, so we're going to Josinho de Mello, who's technical manager at Lino Kayon Keisha in Singapore. I think he's asking about how EEXI and CII interrelate. I suppose they're just two separate.
Yeah, I mean, they're different concepts, but they're related to each other. The EEXI, the energy efficiency existing index. So this is something actually my colleagues from marine power will able to also help what for example retrofits will have, what impact on that, and of course in turn then that will again have an impact on the CII rating as well. So they are interrelated, but TXI is calculated, well, in theory only once, versus the CII is calculated on an annual basis and will always change depending on the vessel's operational patterns.
Okay, so that sort of links to Sankalp Chopra's question. So I think he's with Anglo Eastern in Hamburg, operations superintendent, but he's asking if you want to share anything about Wärtsilä retrofit. You're not actually involved in Wärtsilä's retrofit, and you've probably got colleagues on the webinar who are. So
probably, yes.
If you want to answer this one, do you?
Yes. Just
cutting edge technology for retrofit for compliance. So I guess that means stuff like the air bubbles and the propeller boss cap fins.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of technologies out there, and I'm of course more than happy to connect to my colleagues here who are the experts. As far as I understand, my colleagues do evaluate all of the options that are in the market. Some may be Wärtsilä technologies, some may be not, but then calculate which ones are the, say, options with the best ROI for that specific vessel, how much impact it will have on the main engine, auxiliary engine, on the propeller, propulsion, and so on. So in the digital tool, it's relatively rough. So we don't, say, do any manual calculations. It's the system who does it for us, processing data automatically, but my colleagues then would be able to help with these more specific and in-depth planning. So there is a lot of technologies, and I think they are the expert and they will be able to consult on that.
Okay, and then we don't have any more questions open. There's one question on the chat we haven't covered from Zias. Can you connect your data collection system to manned B&W engine? I suppose the question is similar to before. You probably can, but it's more difficult than connecting to your own, is it?
Yes, I mean, everything is possible, of course, again. And so we have been doing for quite a number of years these full-fledged auto-logging systems. And we still do it. We can do it for any type of machinery on board. Can pull cables and so on, and then collect. From the experience we gathered over these years, it's not always, well, it depends on the purpose we try to, on the goals we try to achieve. A lot of things can be achieved without really tapping into all the data. We don't necessarily collect data just for having the data, but we want to provide means to optimize the vessels, for example, performance, to reduce fuel consumption emissions and so on. So engine data is of course good to have if we really want to look deep into the engine, how machinery is being operated in real time. Also, when we talk about maintenance, for example. So that is something we do. We do it also kind of on different levels, but it's not always. Let's put it that way. It takes quite a bit of resource, and it's not that scalable always. So it takes a bit of time. If it's a very targeted approach on a vessel, of course. But if we're looking at optimizing an entire fleet, we may not have necessarily that luxury if we want to have quick results. And in terms of engine data, also different layers. We can do some optimization in how machinery is operated based on noon reported data already. If that's a wish, we can combine it with high frequency data from navigational equipment, which is our standard setup, where we get an idea of vessel performance. We can then, as a next level, pull cables to whatever equipment is there. And then, of course, again, Wärtsilä Marine Power, we have a service called Expert Insights, which is then very specific to Wärtsilä engines, where you have all the expert consultancy as well. So there's this different levels, but important for us is that we provide, we help our customers no matter what machinery is, but then the level is different.
Yeah, we've got a complicated legal question here from Ranveer Jatta, who's the General Manager of Environmental Compliance with Fleet Management in Hong Kong. He's asking, so if a ship is acquired during the year, is the new owner or manager responsible only for the period when they got control of the ship? I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think you are either, but I'm guessing I don't see any reason why they would be. I guess the CII is based on the whole year, but I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, okay, this question sounds familiar, but I don't have well, I don't want to say anything that might not be 100% accurate here. But I think it does make a difference. But also, I think it depends on what regulation we're talking about. If it's taken over by a different manager, or if it has to be reported for the entire year. We're talking about EUMAV or CII or what it might be. So yeah, I'm sorry, this is more compliance regulations related questions. I would not.
We're going back to data with the next question. So I think Konstantinos is project development leader for Greece, Cyprus, Malta at Bureau Veritas. He's asking about data filtering with your tool and how does it deal with outliers? So you gave a great talk about a year ago about how you model
yes, correct.
Data to get a noonday report. So I don't know. I know you can give a good answer to this one. Or...
Yes, actually, that's a good reference back to our last year's webinar where we went quite a bit into detail how we deal with data itself. Of course, we do know that neither noon report data nor autolog data is always 100% accurate, and we need to process it in a way taking into account data that is not always perfect. And one way could be, of course, filtering out data, but rather than filtering, we prefer to, filtering, I mean, outliers, yes, we filter it out. So there is at the source of the data, we already capture some data that is totally off. But then the core of our product is rather data modeling part, where we collect all the data we get, and then let basically the self-learning algorithm do its thing and learn how the different inputs impact each other, whether sea depth, speed, and so on. There's a number of factors that impact the vessel's performance, and then how do they relate to each other. So this is not something a manual process, but this is our vessel modeling algorithm that works on that. Yeah.
Just put a link to your last webinar in the chat there if anybody wants to watch that one. Yeah, yes. That sounds great. Well, we've got to just start on terms of the customers. I mean, obviously it's very sensitive to talk in public, but I don't know if you're able to talk in generalities. I mean, you showed a lot of questions. I guess these are real examples that your customers are actually asking and you've been working to solve. And one question that comes to my mind, if a company is not using any Wärtsilä products and they think, well, this looks great, do they can they do anything with what you're showing, or do they have to start switching as a system to Wärtsilä?
No, right. So there's again also here different setups, and we're working constantly on providing also more interfaces. So if we talk about performance data, of course, existing companies who use our current reporting tool, SmartLog, there we get the data already. So there's a tablet solution, but there is then also like a software-only solution which can be deployed more easier than a tablet. Or then we also talk about, for example, third-party noon reporting integration. Everything is possible. We try to standardize it a bit, so we don't necessarily do integration to all different formats, but main ones we're aiming to do. So of course, if we have if there are new customers interested in our fleet operations solutions, for example, one way is to start with a software only solution, which is easier to test, and then you can add modules, as we say. So there is a navigational part that is kind of the standard part, which is quite extensive and advanced, but then on top of that, you're able to choose separate modules. So the dots you saw before, we have modules, one for charter party, one for hull performance. Now we have one for emissions, for environmental reporting, UMV. So all those can be chosen separately for the vessels that are needed. Not all are needed for all, but then of course price and so on change depending on what you choose. But we don't kind of force to take the whole package. We try to make it flexible.
Yeah, I guess if you just buy the software but don't have good data behind it, you're not going to get much value out of the software. So it's quite important that the whole
yes, of course, yeah. I mean, there is a bit a trade-off between, say, the easiness to scale of implementation and the amount of data you get. And we always try to find the right balance to get enough data to provide the main options to optimize the fleet, but not overdo it in a sense to make the customer use too much resources for a relatively small benefit. So it's a balance we try to find, and this can be changed along the way if we have first successes with a relatively easy setup, and then we can go a step further and do, for example, a number of vessels, a more in-depth approach, connecting more sensors and so on. So this is also what we do with a couple of our customers.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I think Hamid Soltani has just put a question which sort of read my mind with just a concluding remark. We've just got a couple of minutes left, but he's just saying that prediction is an essential part of CII application to give decision makers a clear perspective for their planning. I mean, I was going to say that what you're showing, I mean, it seems so obvious that shipping companies, if they want to make sure they're managing their fleet and their CII bands, they have to have this, and it's going to be expensive, but it's also extremely useful, and it'll be cheaper in the long run. So my colleague Nef has just said that Hamid is assistant lecturer with International Maritime College in Oman. So hello, Hamid. So yeah. I don't know if you'd like to give any final remarks and maybe take that on.
Yes, this is also, I think, a very good point that we don't necessarily want to start with the details, but we want to start with the big picture. And if you, of course, for example, management, or you want to go, before you go into the details and take some actions on a very detailed level, you need to get the big picture. So in the example of the fleet, which ones are the vessels that actually require some action more urgently than others, so we don't start at the wrong place. And then on a vessel level, which ones are the factors that are more relevant in impacting emissions and other ones may not. So it's all about first determining where is the main, the longest hanging fruits, if you want. Where do you have the biggest impact with swiftest action, so to speak. And then from there you go deeper and deeper. So that's also why we have this fleet level, vessel level, and passage level of the in our dashboard. So you can see the most important big picture data first, and then you dig deeper and go more into targeted areas.
Oh, well, fantastic. Well, I think we can finish there. I think you've given a great picture of where the shipping industry needs to go and showed some things we've never seen before and showed some questions we all know are coming up, but nobody really knew how to answer them. And I think that's fantastic. So thank you very much. And I shall pass back to Nef for the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Karl. And thank you, Marko, for your presentation and for the lively discussion. It seems like everyone is really interested in how to get their CII scores in compliance. So thank you for your thoughts on that. Can I remind our audience that we hold webinars regularly. So if you want to keep up to date with our webinars, you can follow us on LinkedIn or on our website. And so that's all from us from Digital Ship. Have a good day. Bye.